Hello, students! Today we are going to talk about a very important topic, unemployment. But before we do that, I want to ask you a question. What do you think is a country's most valuable resource? Is it gold? Or perhaps oil? Well, it's actually something else. It's people. Today we're going to look at what happens when this most important resource, our people, are willing and able to work but cannot find a job.
So here's how we'll explore this topic. First, we'll start with a story of two friends. This story will help us understand whether people are an asset, that is, something valuable, or a liability. We'll then see what happens when this resource is wasted and look at something called the vicious cycle of unemployment. And finally, we will see how investing in our people can create a virtuous cycle instead.
You know, sometimes the best way to understand big ideas is through a simple story. So let's start with a tale of two friends. Their story will help us see these ideas in action.
Our story takes place in a village called Samapur, and in this village live two friends, Sakal and Vilas. They grew up together, but as we'll see, their lives turned out to be very, very different.
Now, right in Sakal's own family, we see our first example of unemployment. His uncle, Sham, had completed his education. He was qualified and he wanted to work, but he was sitting at home because he couldn't find a job. This is exactly what we mean by unemployment, when a person is willing and able to work but cannot find paid work to do.
So the situation with Sakal's uncle makes us think, is a person who doesn't have a job a burden on the family and the country? Or are they a valuable resource that's just waiting for an opportunity? To answer this, we first need to understand a term called human resource.
So, what is a human resource? It sounds like a big, complicated term, but the idea is simple. It just means all the working people in a country, with all their skills and abilities. It's the combined power of people to create things, provide services, and help the country's economy grow.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. When we invest in our human resources, by giving people good education, training, and healthcare, we are building something called human capital. It's like turning a simple resource into a powerful one. This makes people more productive, and in turn, makes the entire country more productive.
So this leads us to an important question. For a long time, many people believed that having a large population was a big problem for a country. But is that always true? Well, if a large population is educated, skilled, and healthy, it might actually be the country's greatest strength. But you know, the word work can be a little tricky. To understand why some people are considered unemployed while others are not, we need to understand the difference between what we call an economic activity and the work that's done at home.
Let's go back to Sakal's family. His father, Buddha, works in the fields. He earns money for his work. This is an economic activity. Now, his mother, Sheila, also works very hard all day. She cooks, she cleans, and she takes care of the house. But she does not get paid for this work.
And this is a very important point for us to remember. The work that Sheila does at home is essential for her family's well-being. But because it is not paid, it is not counted when we measure a country's national income. It's a huge, invisible contribution to our society. Now, let's turn our attention back to Sakal's friend, Vilas. His story will show us what happens when there is no investment in a person. It can create a very sad and difficult situation, something we call a vicious cycle. You see, life was very hard for Vilas. His father passed away when he was young. He suffered from arthritis, but his family couldn't afford a doctor. Because of these difficulties, he never got a chance to go to school. So he had to take up the same work as his mother, selling fish for a very small amount of money. And this is how the vicious cycle works. It often starts with parents who are themselves disadvantaged, perhaps uneducated or in poor health. They are unable to invest in their own children's education or healthcare. As a result, the children grow up to do unskilled work for low pay. And sadly, this cycle of disadvantage often continues with their children, generation after generation. But is this vicious cycle impossible to break? Absolutely not. And to understand how, let's return to Sakal's story. His life shows us the opposite, a positive cycle, which we call a virtuous cycle. Look at the difference in Sakal's life. His parents understood the importance of education. They encouraged him to study. He not only finished his schooling, but his father even took a loan so that Sakal could do a vocational course in computers. They invested in him. They invested in his future. And what was the result of this investment? Well, this quote explains it perfectly. His education made him a better, more skilled worker. This increased his productivity. And when one person becomes more productive, it doesn't just help them, it adds to the growth of the entire economy.
So you see, investment in people is how a society creates its most valuable assets. Every doctor, every teacher, every engineer, they all started with an investment in their education and their health. This is how we turn our population into a powerful resource.
And if you want a real-world example, look at a country like Japan. Japan has very few natural resources like oil or minerals, so how did it become one of the richest countries in the world? The answer is simple. They invested in their people. They focused on building the best human capital through education and health.
So, we have seen the two paths, the vicious cycle that Velaz was trapped in and the virtuous cycle that Sakal was able to create. The story of these two friends is really a choice that every society has to make. This leaves us with one final and very important question to think about. How can we make sure that every child has the opportunity to be part of a virtuous cycle?